back to the Daily Grind with the only free MMA channel that fucking matters, full-time MMA. And I'm honestly confused here. I'm going to need the comment section. I'm going to need one of you hitters to explain how this happened, because it happened with Chael Sonnen as well. We'll get into it. Rumble Johnson is saying he's not a UFC fighter. I'm out of the UFC, fool. I've filled out my USADA retirement papers. I've did everything I need to do to not be a UFC fighter anymore. The UFC sent me my termination papers. They terminated my contract like 3 days after I retired. I did all the paperwork for USADA you have to fill out for retiring, and now if I wanted to come back, I would have to go through the 6-month process of unretiring in the UFC to come back. And Ariel Helwani said, so wait, that means you're not a UFC fighter. You can sign with someone else, right? If it wasn't the UFC? He was like, yeah, but money talks. The only fight that interests him in the UFC currently is Jon Jones. If he can get a Jon Jones super fight for a big payday, Anthony Johnson will come back to the UFC. Or if he can get millions of dollars in a contract, he'll come back to the UFC. But other than that, he said he's fine doing his other business. He's fine not getting concussions. He's been burnt out on training as an athlete since he was 8 years old, so he's fine being retired. He said he wants to help people with cancer and pain and suffering with the medical marijuana industry, so he's fine doing that and just helping people avoid pain and suffering rather than causing pain and suffering on his opponents. He's going the happy hippie route, and I've said this before. Whenever fighters start going the happy hippie, they usually aren't focused on fighting as much, and I really don't. Usually happy hippie fighters don't do well. If you're going to be a stoner, if you're going to be a pothead, you got to have some killer instinct in you. You can't be like Alex Caceres, Blackie Chan, like, yeah, I just want to make the world a better place, and this country's really making me sensitive, and I want to move out of this country as soon as possible. I don't really care about fighting. That doesn't work in the UFC. You usually end up not getting to the highest level. And there's another person that I can't think of off the top of my head that had that happy hippie personality, and it didn't turn out too well for him. I think he ended up being a WWE fighter. I forget his name, but you guys know who the fuck I'm talking about if you're a hardcore fan. So let's get back to Rumble Johnson. He was sounding crazy. He said, so how much money do you want to come back? You saying for the right numbers you'll definitely come back. And he honestly, he sounded crazy here. He said, I'm like Conor McGregor. You got to give me half the company. He said, so do you think you want more money than you got in your last fight with Daniel Cormier? He said, yeah. Now this is where I had to pause for a second and ask, what the fuck? So let me get this straight. You never beat Daniel Cormier. You retired abruptly out of nowhere. The UFC still respected you enough to grant you your UFC release, and now you're demanding more money for your comeback, and it'll only be against Jon Jones? What in the hell is going on here? This is why I was confused. Why did the UFC even grant him a release? Do you remember the UFC? That's not what I was going to say. Remember the Chael Sonnen situation where he came back, he was off of his USADA suspension, and then out of nowhere he was with Bellator, and it was like, okay, I thought he was coming back to the UFC, his suspension was up, and then out of nowhere he was like, yeah, I never looked at my contract, I guess I was out of it. And it's like, you know that's not the case. One of the top fighters in the world, they know what's going on in their contract, they've got agents and stuff, so I didn't understand the Chael Sonnen going to Bellator move, but I don't care, because that's the right move. Now this one here though, why would the UFC grant Anthony Johnson his release, his actual terminated release, which means Bellator can they can haggle, they can make Rumble Johnson an offer to come to Bellator that he can't refuse, and he would have to take it, and he could take it. Ariel Helwani specifically asked him, so if a company that rhymes with Bellator comes and makes you an offer you can't refuse, can you fight for them? And he said, yeah, I'm not a UFC fighter. He repeated it. He said, but they're going to have to show me the money. He said, this is business, of course. You know, if they show me the money, any fighter would get off their ass for $5 million. And so, what the fuck? Scott Coker and Bellator have been showing they're willing to spend the cash. The UFC has been showing they're not willing to spend the cash as far as overpaying fighters for what they don't think they're worth. Bellator could see a light heavyweight like Rumble Johnson and give him $1 million a fight easy. That'll be one of their new stars. Bellator, if they can get Rumble Johnson, I mean, they might be overpaying for him because he wants so much money. But if they get Rumble Johnson, that just adds to the credibility of Bellator. Another huge fighter for Bellator. Why would the UFC let that happen? What does the UFC have to gain from letting Anthony Rumble Johnson go? He said the UFC showed me respect when they let me go, so I respect them for that. When is the UFC doesn't give a fuck about respecting Anthony Johnson? So maybe this was a deal. I don't know. I'm not going to get too far into it. I'm not going to sit here and think about all the possibilities and rack my brain. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. I don't really care to understand it because I don't give a fuck. If Anthony Johnson comes back, I'll watch. I didn't like his last fight with Rumble Johnson. I didn't like his game plan. Even his coaches didn't like the game plan. There was a lot of weird stuff around UFC 210. Towelgate. They still fight. He has a weird-ass game plan. Now then he retires out of nowhere after the ring. Now he's talking about coming back for the right price. But whoa. It might not be with the UFC because they granted me my release. You would think that the UFC is not too happy with Rumble Johnson after that abrupt retirement. So you're going to keep him on ice until he decides to come back and fulfill that contract. But nope. Oh, yeah, you want to retire? And yeah, here you go, bud. Maybe they were... Maybe they felt bad for for Rumble Johnson because Daniel Cormier missed weight and he still had to fight. But since when did the UFC start feeling bad for fighters? I mean, that's not their MO. So I don't know what else to say. You guys see the dilemma here. You guys see where I'm confused. So I'll be looking forward to the comment section. It is what it is. Let the hitters know what the fuck you think about Anthony Rumble Johnson possibly to Bellator or Anthony Rumble Johnson versus John Jones. Super fight. I mean, a bigger super fight there would be Stipe or Brock Lesnar over Rumble Johnson or Gustafsson or Rumble. All of those are options, but I don't think they're going to pay Rumble what he's asking just to come back and fight John Jones. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Scott Coker and Bellator would way rather pay Rumble $1 million to come be a Bellator star. But and if that happens, if Bellator picks up Rumble Johnson, you just have to scratch your head and think, what the fuck did the UFC let him even go for? With that being said, I'm confused. Hit me up in the comments and let me know what you think about this. Hit thumbs up, hit subscribe. Let the hitters know what the fuck you tell me in the comments, dude. You want to know why women aren't allowed in space? To avoid scenarios like this. Houston, we have a problem. What's the problem? Yeah, great. Pretend like you don't know what I'm talking about.